Hello, I'm Jonasz Lewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. As always, I hope you enjoy the journey. On this episode, we're diving into a topic that's been simmering for decades, but it's finally boiling over. The Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia are saying enough is enough to the outdated and frankly insulting label of post-Soviet states. The countries that shook off the Soviet yoke 30 years ago are tired of being lumped in with a regime that they didn't just leave. They kicked it to the curb like a bad habit on a New Year's Day. So without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Saturday marked the 30th anniversary of Russian forces' complete withdrawal from Latvia and Estonia. The pullout followed years of suppression and persecution under Soviet occupation. The occupation of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania began in 1940, when Soviet forces entered the respective countries' territories under the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The Soviets were then expelled by Nazi German troops, only to return in 1944 and stay until the mid-1990s. The period of Soviet occupation was marked by extreme violence and persecution by the Soviet secret police, the NKVD, as well as other elements of the Soviet apparatus. Mass executions, deportations and repression of the native population became commonplace in the Soviet era in the Baltics. But with the era of stagnation nibbing at the Soviet system, reforms could not be sidelined any longer. The USSR's new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev's glasnost and perestroika released the long-suppressed nationalist genie of the Baltic republics in what came to be known as the Singing Revolution. With the waning of the Soviet Union towards its ultimate fall in December 1999, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia regained independence. The official withdrawal of Russian troops from Lithuania took place on August 31, 1993. Latvia and Estonia had to wait a year longer for what hung by a thread until the very last moment.
The Russians would naturally find a reason to stay, because when Russia announced that they would build their military bases around Russia, including one military base in Latvia, it was officially put in the documents. After that, the Russians said, "Oh, that was a technical error, well, this is a normal solution for the Russians." And then, 2 days later, Yeltsin officially revoked his contract. Raising our demands even higher would be a risk to the negotiations. Those troops would stay here in some form. Clearly, joining NATO or the European Union would not be possible.
The withdrawal of Russian troops allowed the Baltic states to join NATO and reap security benefits from the membership.
Now, as always, it's time to take a look at the issue in greater detail. So, let's begin. Recently, the Latvian government declared that the Baltic states are not post-Soviet because, and I quote, "the USSR was our occupier." Now, that might sound obvious, but the fact that they have to say it out loud in 2024 tells you everything you need to know about how little the world has moved on from Cold War clichés. It's like calling Germany a post-Nazi state. Sure, it's technically actually true, but it completely ignores the fact that they have spent the last 80 years trying to distance themselves from that particular chapter of their history. And let's be clear, Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia were not willing participants in the Soviet Union. In fact, they were annexed by force, occupied and subjected to decades of brutal repression. So when someone refers to them as post-Soviet, it's not just inaccurate, it is an insult. You know, it's like introducing someone at a party as the ex of that abusive partner, when they have been happily remarried for decades. It's not just wrong, it's a disservice to everything they have accomplished since then. And boy, have the Baltic states accomplished a lot. Just take a look at the last 30 years. These countries have transformed themselves into vibrant democracies, integrated fully into the European Union, and also have become key players in NATO. In fact, they have become so integral to the West that any conversation about European security now starts with, how do we protect the Baltics? That's not a post-Soviet success story. That is a full-blown reinvention. Now, why does this matter? Because words shape perceptions, and perceptions shape reality. If the world keeps calling the Baltic states post-Soviet, it subtly reinforces the idea that they are still somehow linked to Russia, that they are still in the Kremlin's shadow or some imaginary sphere of influence. And trust me, that's the last place they want to be. Remember, these are countries that, along with Poland, were among the first European nations to call out Russian aggression in Ukraine. They have been leading the charge for tougher sanctions on Moscow, and they are constantly on high alert because they know what it's like to live under the threat of Russian tanks rolling in. These nations are not looking back, they are sprinting forward, and they would like the rest of the world to finally catch up. So, next time someone refers to Latvia, Lithuania or Estonia as post-Soviet, do them a favor, correct them. These countries have moved on, and it's high time the rest of us did too. They are not relics of the past, they are pioneers of the future, fully independent, fully modern, and fully committed to forging their own path. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Artis Pabriks, former foreign minister of Latvia, now the director of the Northern Europe Foreign Policy think tank. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello. Thank you.
So let us begin with the process of how the Baltic states have managed to remove the last vestiges of Russian influence. This, of course, has not been an easy path, now was it? Can you mention a few of the most important moments that allowed the Baltic states to finally remove Russia from the ongoing existence of these countries in a way that enabled them to fully embrace the accession to the European Union and NATO later on?
Yes, from the very beginning of our renewed independence in 1991, we understood that until Russian troops will remain on the Latvian or Baltic soil, we will never be independent and the Russian troops could return again. So we initiated the process of withdrawal of Russian troops. But that was a great compromise, and the number of Soviet Russian troops on Latvian soil was very huge. Basically, we had about 700 military bases. Personnel could be around 100,000, and there have been 4 spots where Russians also could keep nuclear missiles. So the talks about withdrawal started very soon, and I must say that a very large assistance was granted by our allies, first of all by United States, but also such countries as Sweden. Of course, there have been compromises because, for instance, Russians were delaying the process, number one. Number two, they were avoiding also to call these troops occupational forces, so we had to agree on simply foreign troops. Thirdly, they initiated the talks with asking Latvia or Baltic countries to pay a compensation for their withdrawal. While we, of course, were assuming that they do have to pay compensation because of the occupation. And I would say that the largest compromise what we had to accept was that Russians enforced on us to accept that all the military pensioners which have been leaving the Soviet army on the Latvian soil, they could be allowed to stay and they would not be withdrawn. So that basically meant about 20,000 former retired Soviet officers, which remained in Latvia, including their family members, up to 1,000 people, and which later on, of course, in later years, were used also as a claim for rights of national minorities. So basically, military pensioners suddenly turn into the ethnic minority and national rights questionnaires.
And I'm assuming that these are the people that don't really want to integrate with the Latvian society. Instead, they prefer to go along their own ways. But also, Russia might actually, as you've mentioned, not only be using them for propaganda purposes, but also perhaps conducting some sort of clandestine operations still in this at this time, 30 years onwards, right?
Well, officers are always officers, but on the other hand, it's already 30 years has passed. So I would say that original military personnel probably is not very much left here because time and age takes the score. But of course, just like every other Central and Eastern European country, and also Western European countries, where we can see now such type of operations always can take place. But I believe that we know how to take care of them. So actually, in some ways, I think such countries as Latvia and probably Poland have been better prepared than maybe some other Western countries.
Which brings me to another question. Why exactly would you say that countries such as the Baltic states, and also, as you've mentioned, Poland, several other countries that have felt the pressure of Soviet occupation for decades, are now better prepared to understand what Russia really does, including what threat it poses to the Western world?
Well, I think we understand the threat better because it is for us, for Poland or Latvia, it is existential threat. Secondly, we have been dealing with these people and with Russia for a very long time, so we understand them better, and we are not living in unnecessary illusions. While in many Western countries where the movements, either left-wing movements or different type of NGOs and also journalists, they simply did not understand up to the end what really means Soviet Union, how do they operate, and how also agencies of current Russia operates.
So would you say that the crucial moment really in this entire process was the removal of Russian military bases? Because looking at other countries that used to be within the Soviet sphere of influence, they have not been able to do so. And in the vast majority of them, the Russian influence still lingers. So it is safe to assume that had there been any sort of military presence in the Baltic states, the accession to NATO, for example, would have been much more difficult, if not outright impossible.
I would say that we understood already from our 1939 experience that if Russian troops will be here, earlier or later they will claim supremacy and they might return. So we use this window of opportunity, support from United States and other allies to remove them. And if they would not be removed, then at this moment we would be neither a member of NATO nor member of EU, and probably we already would be in a conflict with Russia, just like Ukraine now.
But this has been a success story, right? Would you say that other countries can still follow this example? In particular, it is often said that Belarus has found itself in a really difficult situation now, given that not only does it have military presence, it also has what seems to be Russian nuclear military presence. But you've mentioned that there were facilities that were designed to station nuclear weapons in Latvia, and these were actually removed along with the rest. So would you say this example, this pathway, can be revisited by future free Belarusian government in the process of getting rid of Russian influence there?
Well, for us in the Baltic states and Latvia, very much helped our historic experience and the fact that we have been independent in the interwar period. So we were thinking differently, and we had a very clear path. We wanted full independence now, and we wanted to do nothing with Soviet Union and with Russia. For Belarus and maybe for some other countries which have been under the Soviet control, there were no such a clear-cut political decision. And this is why Belarus is also paying now a very high price. Obviously, if Belarusian nation and the Belarusian political opposition would like to be a sovereign country, they cannot do this without removal of Russian troops from their soils. That's very clear. But I think at this moment, very much will be determined in the Ukrainian war, and there must be this clear-cut wish on Belarusian side to be really independent, which is not the fact now. At this moment, Belarus is in a basically quite full control from the Russian side.
And there is, of course, another difference, namely that back then the Soviet Union was gone. Russia was weak. Right now, Russia is a resurgent revisionist state. It has many problems of its own. It has completely failed its attempt at subjugating Ukraine. And right now, of course, it is inflicting a lot of damage there, but doesn't look like it's going to succeed in its imperial ambitions. Nevertheless, would you say that for the future success of Central and Eastern Europe, as a community of free democratic countries, it is necessary for the West to look at your experience, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and think about how only the defeat of Russia and Ukraine can actually ensure this scenario. Otherwise, there will still be Cold War-style tension in the entire region, and countries like Ukraine and Belarus will be still bearing the brunt of it.
I very much agree. And the outcome of Ukrainian war, we can discuss the definition of defeat or victory, but it's very clear that there must be the end solution where Russian troops are leaving Ukrainian sovereign territory. And this is much larger than just the security of Baltic states, Northern Europe, or Central or Eastern Europe. At stake is the security of whole West and also the trust and credibility of West and transatlantic alliance, because also such countries as China and many other countries are observing the Western reaction. And if we are losing Ukraine, if we allow to Ukraine to lose this war, then we would have increased tensions in Middle East against the West and also in Pacific. And I don't think that this is what really our Western partners and allies are wishing for.
So we can see that the West is fairly consolidated over Ukraine. There are differences, of course, and there are differences in approach. There are differences as to the meaning of victory. But in the meantime, the Baltic states are not sitting idle. They are preparing for any eventualities the future may hold. Can you briefly describe what is being done, of course, within the realm of what can be revealed without compromising any military secrets, to ensure that the Baltic states will never again have to experience any sort of incursions or occupation or any sort of forced control from Russia?
Well, you very correctly described that. Never again, because our historic experience of 1939, 1940, 1945 was very bitter. So we are not going to take chances, and we have a resolve and political will to defend our independence against any kind of aggression. And that means that we are doing everything to organize our societies to be capable to withstand such pressures. For instance, just like Poland, at this moment, our military spending in all three countries is more than 3% from GDP, and it will grow. We are also supporting the development of our military industry and cooperation with other friendly countries, including Poland, because logistic lines are important. Thirdly, we are also investing very much in construction of defense lines next to our eastern border. So just following Madrid summit conclusions, we are not ready to give up any inch or centimeter of meters of our territory, because we don't want that here happens something like Bucha, Irpin, or something what we experienced during the Second World War. So we introduced also compulsory military service. We have a military and crisis education in our high schools for our youngsters. So basically, we are doing everything what we can do within scope of our resources.
So overall, the success story of the Baltic states should inspire other countries, including in the West, to take a look at that and see just how a realistic approach towards Russia may actually be the key to success. In this day and age, Russia, after all, is no longer a partner that can be trusted. And sometimes old traditional methods, preparedness, resilience, actually serve us the best. Artis Pabriks, former Foreign Minister of Latvia, was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to Eastern News Flash, a curated selection of all the stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. Montenegro and Serbia remain eager to join the European Union. Both countries' presidents participated in the GlobeSec Security Conference in the Czech Republic over the weekend, a platform they seized to confirm their EU accession ambitions. In the case of Vučić, it was also a moment he used to disavow allegations of a hidden agenda.
Montenegrin President Jakov Milatovic shared his prediction with the audience at the GlobeSec Security Conference in Prague that Montenegro would join the EU within the next 5 years.
The goal is to become the 28th member state of the EU as of 2028.
He added that he tackled the topic with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen the previous day and suggested she agreed. Von der Leyen, who addressed the same forum, has not brought up publicly any discussions this week with Milatovic. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić, who also participated in the conference, was skeptical of hypothesizing about Montenegro and Serbia's accession dates and also denied playing the EU and Moscow simultaneously.
I don't believe that they are going to be a part of European Union in 2028. I don't believe that we are going to be a part of European Union in 2028. There are no both sides. We are on EU path.
Vučić maintained that his country's accession process depended on normalizing relations with Kosovo, a formerly Serbian province that broke away and declared independence in 2008. Belgrade does not recognize Kosovo's independence, nor has it endorsed European sanctions on Russia.
Staying on the topic of the Kosovo-Serbian feud, Kosovo President Vjosa Osmani, also attending the GlobeSec conference in Prague, warned against allowing any dark force to create division between Kosovo and its Western allies.
Kosovo President Osmani's statement comes as her government imposes increasingly central authority in the north of the Balkan country, home to a local majority of Serbs, who continue to resist recognizing Kosovo's independence, which was declared by its ethnic Albanian majority in 2008. Speaking to reporters at the conference in Prague, she was deflecting criticism from the US, the EU, the UK, Germany and France over Kosovo security forces' closure of 5 facilities in majority Serb municipalities on Friday. The Kosovo president deemed the structures illegal according to the 2013 Brussels agreement. Kosovo authorities have been cracking down on the use of Serbian dinars and Serbian postal and bank outlets by the tens of thousands of ethnic Serbs in North Kosovo.
And now to Russia-friendly Azerbaijan, where voting has concluded in the country's first parliamentary election since it regained complete control of the breakaway Nagorno-Karabakh region. Turns out that the ballot was fraught with irregularities at polling stations, with some people allegedly voting twice. More in our report.
Azerbaijani 6 million plus voters had few alternatives to loyalists of President Ilham Aliyev. Some of the voters were reportedly seen on video casting ballots more than once. Those caught red-handed either refused to explain themselves or said they were voting in the name of their friends. To assess the elections, 50 organizations, including the largest contingent from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, have been conducting observer missions. As for the results of the election, one exit poll showed the ruling party winning 63 of 125 seats in the parliament, dominated by Aliyev's New Azerbaijan party. On the side of the opposition, the Musavat party, the major counterweight for the ruling party, mustered 34 candidates for the election, with only 25 of them passing the registration threshold. The Republican Alternative Opposition Party had 12 candidates. Meanwhile, the leading opposition Azerbaijan Popular Front Party, for the 7th straight time, veered clear from what it called the government's masquerade of a fraudulent election.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.